So on Friday, Dan LeBatard and friends kicked off his DraftKings partnership with a 24-hour stream called Freedumb. And Charles Barkley was among their deep group of guests. So I'm going to break down those comments for y'all.
Happening in the league, Charles, and you see the evolution of ratings dropping and people linking the opinions of black players to the ratings decline and how strong and firm and politically active, racially active the league is at the height of some of the things happening in America. Do you think those two things are associated? Do you believe that the ratings decline, even though ratings are declining all over the place because of streaming and everything else? Do you think the ratings decline is tied to the black players being too vocally black?
Yes. I think that people watch sports, Dan, to get away from reality. That's what they do. Like, I don't care how bad your life sucks. When your team is doing good, you in a good mood, you're proud, your city's on fire, But if you turn on your television every time, and guys who are making 30, 40, $50 million are telling you stuff. Like, and also, I think you got to realize something. All these people have lost their jobs. They have lost their businesses. I mean, this is a unique situation. Man, I feel, first of all, we lost some loved ones. I mean, think about it. You got all your relatives dying. You lost your job. Your badass bitch at home with you every day. I think it was so funny during the pandemic. I was playing golf with my friends. They're like, yo, man, I think something wrong with my kids. They're crazy as hell. Because they have to spend every single day with those kids. And I think that, I think the problem with the NBA, and I've said this publicly, and I just said this, you have to realize, Dan, I want you to be an ally of mine.
Let's first, before Charles jumps into another subset of his statements, you have to keep in mind with Charles Barkley is you usually have to have a lot of nuance when it comes to dissecting his political statements. The first part is him saying that he thinks these athletes are trying to push pro-black agenda too much. And the fact that and people watch sports to get away from it. Guess what? The moments of political activism are only a small moment relative to the sports themselves. And I know that they are going to use their moments to raise awareness. But at the same time, it's not going to affect my ability to take a break from what's going on in our political society right now. And there's just so many people that are incapable of doing that. In the grand scheme of things, those moments of political activism are very small in comparison to the actual game itself. And it doesn't matter whether you're someone like me who's capable of understanding that, or if you're someone who isn't and ends up canceling all the things that they like, the ways that they allow themselves to break through their cycle. Because for me in the daytime, whether it's watching or creating independent left content, then you get in the nighttime. Sometimes you go out and run errands. Other times, watch sports. Then later at night, catch up on more independent left content that happened while sports was on. I'll tell you, that's been my routine a lot. And another point that Charles Barkley got into from this is the whole people don't want to hear about problems from millionaires. Look, I've been out of a job since the early part of the pandemic last year. But the one thing I won't do is punch at people saying the problems of the working class are more important, and therefore when millionaires bring up their issues, they don't matter. I disagree. There is room for this world to acknowledge the problems of the poor working class and the problems of the millionaire working class, which in fact sometimes those millionaire athletes are shining light on the problems of the poor working class as well. So there in fact is the other issue that Charles Barkley poses in that first part of his statement right there is then he talks about quarantine life, and I still don't think his point is effective, because I still believe you can let go of the small moments of political activism from athletes and still allow yourself the opportunity to get away. Or if you're like me, you can appreciate those moments when you agree with them, disagree with them, but don't allow yourself to cancel sports when you disagree with the form of activism, and still allow yourself the opportunity to get away from youth sports as a break as well. Although one thing that he did get right in that first statement is the success of your sports team does cover up a lot of the problems you may have. It'll get you amped up when your team is doing good and you only manage to sleep 4 hours, but then you know there's a big game tonight, and with that amp up in your brain, it's going to prevent you from getting tired and being tempted to taking a nap. Well, let's hear more from Charles.
I don't want to alienate you. I want you to be an ally. I think a lot of times these guys, they're alienating the fans and people, not just fans. It's like I want all this stuff that's been fucked up for 400 years. I want it fixed tomorrow. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And so I use this analogy all the time. Anybody want to help black people or Hispanics, please help me. I'm not going to be yelling at you because you had nothing to do with this stuff that was set up 400 years ago. I'm not going to sit around and yell at you about these damn Confederate statues. That's a waste of my energy.
All right, so I'm going to start with that last part that he said first. The whole Confederate statues thing. Even though it's a visual positive to not have Confederate statues staring in the face of black people as they walk by, they're mainly symbolic victories. And if there's one thing that came from Black Lives Matter protest last summer, most of the victories were symbolic. And symbolic victories don't amount to anything. Here's where I disagree with Charles on this next part. The whole alienating of allies. Here's the issue. Still trying to work on, black people are still trying to build their allies. And guess what? Not every approach to ally building is going to be kind and compassionate. There's going to be moments where it's more hard hitting, aggressive, critical, and it's going to call white people out. Trust me, I understand this. And it instead, I think it points out white fragility. And what you'll see a lot among white conservatives is when black people try to call out problems within the white community and their treatment of them, the typical white response is to get defensive. The issue here is there's still a majority of white people in this country that take the defensive stance anytime black people bring up problems with racism and their treatment. While you've got a minority of white people that is like, yes, I understand. You've got a great point. Fortunately, some of those people are liberals, and some of them only tend to agree with the black people when Republicans are in charge. Then you've got, so that even cuts down the better white allies even more, due to the fact that when it comes down to it, you really do have to be opposed to both parties when it comes to achieving black liberation. Then the last thing I'll add here is when Charles Barkley brings up the whole issues from 400 years ago and how people today aren't responsible for them, that's technically not true. When that response is made, that tends to let people off the hook. That's the problem with that mentality. You've made minimal progress to improve the lives of black people, but when you don't acknowledge the issues that haven't changed in the 400 years that they've had to endure slavery and how they've had to morph and reform slavery and marginally improve their freedom, it lets a lot of people off the hook for further improvement. And there's that whole, and when Charles Barkley said that the demand sounded like we want this tomorrow, that's a false pretense. I think anyone in the movement for Black Lives Matter, the people, not the leadership, they know that things aren't going to happen overnight. But what they do know is there's not a lot of time to make that change happen. And that's what they want more people to get. It's a sense of urgency, not an unreasonable demand.
So anybody want to help me help black people? I'm all in. Anybody want to help me help Hispanics? I'm all in. But I'm not going to yell at you, Dan. I'm not going to yell at you, Stu or Mike, because this shit started 400 years ago. So it is not going to be quick. It hadn't been built. I mean, you look at now. Think about it. I told like all these guys are running around pumping themselves in the chest and saying like, man, we all made a difference. You know what your politicians been doing? Changing the election law. Let's change the law. But we've been running around pumping our chests and like, well, all this stuff we did in the bubble and all our social activism. I said, yo man, we need to take a step back to this. We need to listen. Stuff that happened in history is awful. Awful. Can you help me make it better? That to me is a better way to go about it than like, nah, I want all this shit changed tomorrow. I want all these statues taken down. Because they're like, hey, I had nothing to do with that. So I think the NBA, I think their heart is in the right place. I think the players' heart is in the right place. But the big thing they're missing is everybody here had nothing to do with the shit that was set up hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And we're yelling at them like, I need you to listen to me. I want your help. To me, that's a better way to go about it than yelling and screaming at people. And I think the NBA has kind of lost that. They're like, no.
All right, I'll concede. One of the better points Charles Barkley has made here is that the yelling and screaming approach isn't always going to work. But I think he kind of leaves some holes in the potential solutions. Like, technically, you aren't directly responsible for the stuff that happened 400 years ago. But here's the things that still haven't changed. And here's the way that the ruling class is responsible for continue to carry those things on. I think that's a bit more of an expanded approach here. From a people standpoint, yeah, he is right that they aren't responsible. And maybe you'll get more people to understand it when you frame it through the lens of the ruling class, because that's what really hasn't changed. But the thing is, there are certain parts of the issues where people just really haven't changed enough. And I think that's where Charles Barkley lets people off the hook. I think he also made a better point where everything that happened in the bubble, it really didn't work out that well. Look, you had watered down slogans on the back of your uniforms, the symbolism of Black Lives Matter on the court. You folded at an opportunity for creating energy for a real strike in this country. Seriously, the NBA had a chance to create a real general strike. But no, they had to be convinced by Barack Obama to stop. Then to be placated by, oh, we'll just make most of your arenas available for polling during the next election. And only that election as well. Then it reduced the trickle-down effect. It made it seem like when other sports got on board with it, it really reduced it to like a social media challenge when they tried to strike in solidarity with them. So, yeah, I also agree that the NBA and the players, they tend to have their heart in the right place. But the reason why I started the Rochford Files is to make sure people know that NBA players and other athletes and their political activism isn't always going in the right direction. But instead of what you commonly see is people calling that out from their right, they need to hear more left-wing media people call that out from their left. Somebody like a Justin Jackson will do that. Occasionally you'll see people like Nico House, Kyle Kulinski do it as well, because if there's one thing that the left media space doesn't have much, it's oh yeah, I forgot. Pasta Jardula, he will do it as well. But the point is, it's hard to find left-wing media personalities who will frequently talk about the political crossover, and you'll probably, the closest you'll get is Dave Zirin. By the way, if you haven't watched it yet, y'all should go check out his interview that got released on the Vanguard last week. Another group that will talk sports a bit more than your average lefty media voice. But before I get too far off on a tangent, I think that just exposes where there's room for opportunity. And I'd like to get more people who identify with being a sports fan to be more politically engaged like I am. Even though the pandemic really accelerated it, I think it really helped to experience the second time that the DNC prevented Bernie Sanders from winning the primary, and that's another thing that motivated my further move to the left. In addition to the protest over last summer, I think those protests were the difference in me being somewhere between socialism and communism. I would consider myself a hybrid socialist communist, and being stuck as a social democrat. I firmly do believe if not for those events, I'd probably stuck as a social democrat, minus some of the bird brain thinking that you see a lot from them right now, which I'll expose in my last segment. Let's resume with Chuck.
Gonna beat you over the head. A normal person gonna be like, no, I don't want to beat over the head. I had nothing to do with this.
How do you feel about the Nets?
All right, I didn't realize that it just ended right there, and you pretty much got to beat people over the head with it. I think that you can't have a one size all fits all approach to how you increase awareness with these issues, because some people will respond well to the aggressive screaming approach. And that's why, for example, back to Force the Vote, when you hear Jimmy Dore yelling and screaming on a weekly basis, it's what worked really well. But then you also got people who get really turned away from the aggressive, abrasive personalities of Jimmy Dore. Then they respond better to a kind, well-hearted intellect type like Brianna Joy Gray. And then you have people who try to be more level-headed but have this similar messaging. And I feel like so far I've displayed the level-headed voice. And when you hear things come from people who maintain more level-headedness, I think that will resonate as well. In addition to getting people out of the idea of the electoralism scam, the increase of awareness is the next one.